So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name's Claire and I am the business librarian at Glenview Public Library. Tonight's program is Access to Justice, How North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic Can Help. And it will be presented by Michelle Knipmeyer, Senior Social Worker, and Ilana Forbes, Senior Staff Attorney for the Domestic Violence Practice. So please welcome Michelle and Ilana.
Hello to everybody, especially to those of you who I cannot see. As Claire mentioned, I'm Michelle Knipmeyer and I'm the Senior Social Worker, joined here by Ilana Forbes, who is a Senior Staff Attorney, and we both work at the domestic violence practice of North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic provides a variety of services, but the overarching thing that we do is we provide free legal services in the areas of domestic violence, housing, and immigration. So I will break that down for you in just a moment, but just some background about who we are. We have been around since about 2015, which is when we were founded by Nancy Brodering, who is the mayor of Highland Park. At the time, we were known as the Highland Park Highwood Legal Aid Clinic, which some people might be more familiar with us as, but that's because we were just serving Highwood and Highland Park at the time. But since then, the need has grown, we've expanded our services, and now we have our current name, which we switched to in 2019. This is just to give you a sense of how much we've grown over the years. Initially, in that first year in 2015, we started off with 84 cases. Since then, now we've expanded to cover all of Lake County and Northern Cook. So in 2022, we hit over 1,500 cases. Now we have 37 full-time staff members. We have a whole network of pro bono attorneys who we refer out to, and we're now in a new office in Highland Park. So this is just kind of a breakdown of our different service areas to give you a sense of how many cases we have in each practice. So the overarching mission of North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, and it's a mouthful, is to provide accessible, quality, equitable, and free legal services in the areas of domestic violence, housing, and immigration, so that low-income, at-risk community members have the access to justice and opportunity to live productive and secure lives. I'll get more into what that means in just a moment, but main thing to remember is that we have three practice areas, again, which are domestic violence, housing, and immigration. As I mentioned in the last slide, we cover all of Lake County and Northern Cook. Our grant allows us to mainly work out of three different courthouses in Waukegan, Rolling Meadows, and Skokie. Occasionally, in the domestic violence practice anyway, we take some cases at 555 West Harrison in the city. But it just depends on what the case looks like, how resource heavy it is, etc. We speak English, obviously, at the clinic. A large majority of the staff also speak Spanish. We also have Polish speakers, Korean speakers, an Urdu speaker. And for any language that we do not speak, we use language line interpretation services. So it's really important to us that we get people's story and their perspective in their native language, especially within the domestic violence practice. So we want to make sure that we meet people where they are. The other really important thing to know about us is that we are all trauma informed. All of the attorneys have to take a 40-hour domestic violence training. So regardless of where you're getting services, we're still sensitive to trauma and the trauma that can often bring people to us. Everything that we work with is 100% confidential. We're not sharing your information with anyone. And we're compassionate as well. We've really curated an absolutely wonderful team to make sure that we're really providing the best and most sensitive and compassionate services as possible. So I'm going to give a breakdown of each practice, starting with domestic violence, which is where Ilana and I work. Before I give a breakdown of the services, it's really important to know that domestic violence means so much more than physical harm, especially under the law in Illinois. A lot of people will call us and say, I haven't been physically hurt, but my husband is keeping my paychecks from me, or he insults me a lot, or I'm not allowed to go meet up with my friends or my family. I haven't seen anyone in a long time. So that all falls under the definition of domestic violence. It includes mental, emotional, sexual, and financial harm and harassment. So if you don't feel physically or emotionally safe in your relationship, you could be experiencing abuse. And that is one of the biggest things that we do is help survivors really figure out that what they're experiencing is abuse, and working with them to figure out what their options are. So on that note, with these options, here are a lot of the services that we provide, starting with civil and emergency and plenary order of protections. If you're not familiar with an order of protection, there's two kinds. There's an emergency, which can last up to 3 weeks, and then there's a plenary, which can last up to 2 years. We also work with stalking no contact orders, which are slightly different. Firearms restraining orders, anything that falls under the family law umbrella. So divorce proceedings, parenting time, how much of that time is allotted to each parent, which is kind of self-explanatory. The types of responsibilities that each parent is allowed to have, whether it's religious or schooling or medical, child support, which is a big one, allocation and support modifications. So sometimes people will come in and say, I have this agreement with the court where I'm allowed to have this much parenting time, but I would like to change that. Or, I'm getting some support, but this isn't fair. There's been changes. So those people would come to us, and that's where we would begin their case. We are not, well, okay, Ilana would actually probably disagree with this because she's done more and more work with DCFS, but we advocate with DCFS proceedings, both the attorneys and myself as a social worker. Ilana has been our absolute superstar, helping parents with DCFS cases who are survivors of abuse, because a lot of the time DCFS might come in and indicate both the survivor and the abuser with child abuse. So say there's an altercation between two parents where the child is present, DCFS might indicate the abuser and the survivor of the abuse with child abuse. So that is where we try to advocate with DCFS as much as possible. Ideally get those indications expunged if we can, and really work with people to help them jump through the hoops that DCFS has. As I mentioned in the first bullet point, we handle civil emergency and plenary orders of protection. So we don't directly work with criminal cases, but a lot of our survivors also have criminal cases where their abuser has been criminally charged. So we work with the state's attorneys heavily on those cases. We try to advocate for survivors as best as we possibly can, explain what's happening to them, et cetera, so that they have some support during that process, or at least additional support. And then there is social service support, which is what I do. So I am a mandated reporter, which means that if I suspect that a child or someone who is disabled, if they're being abused, that is something that I have to report to the state, that I would have to report to DCFS. So the attorneys are not mandated reporters. They have confidentiality with their clients. So The way that it typically works when I have a referral is the client will do an intake, and the attorney realizes, this person has mentioned they're struggling with food insecurity, or they really need a safe place to stay. They will then refer that client to me. They'll make me aware if there is something that would trigger my mandated reporter duty, so that I'm taking a little bit extra care. And then I would work with that client to get whatever resources they need. So that's how I'm connected with the library. I love libraries. Libraries offer a unbelievable amount of services for families, especially for programs for kids, employment, language learning, things like that. So I connect clients to really whatever they need, whatever I possibly can, whether it's state benefits, safety planning, if someone isn't safe within the home, or they want to leave the home, but they don't really know how they're going to get set up financially or get to a safe place. I've had some parents come to me and say, I would really love after school activities for my child, but I have no idea how I'm going to pay for them. Really anything that falls under that umbrella, I try to work with our clients. We do a lot of work in the community as well. During lockdown, the brainchild of my director was the banana bread project, which kind of came out of everyone making banana bread and sharing recipes during lockdown. So we knew that abuse was skyrocketing, but we needed a way to really reach people where they were. So the Banana Bread Project started out as a website, which was bananabreadhelp.com. And it looks like something completely innocuous, just a banana bread recipe. But as you scroll down the page, there are resources embedded in there for domestic violence survivors, which tell them how to contact us, how to get to a safe place, how to call the domestic violence hotline, things like that. And that's expanded into monthly cooking tutorials that we do. So we'll pull in our partners from the community to do a Zoom cooking tutorial. We've made, oh gosh, what have we made, Ilana? Cookies, tacos, someone made fish one night. Yeah, we've done them in English and Spanish. But the idea is the same. It looks like something completely innocuous, just like a cooking tutorial from someone in the community. But then in the chat function on Zoom, there are attorneys like Ilana who can do offer legal advice, do safety planning, set up intakes, that sort of thing. We have a survivor guide, which is a pamphlet, and it's been expanded into a QR code in case someone doesn't feel safe having paper in their purse that their abuser could find. That also links to different resources that survivors might need, helping them understand that what they're going through is abuse, etc. We're also partnering with doctors. We have a project in flux for the question that always gets asked when you go to your doctor, which is, are you safe at home? Always gets asked to women as a type of screening question to screen for domestic violence, but it doesn't necessarily elicit the response that you're looking for. So our director is working with different doctors to revamp that question and give them an efficient but still effective way to get their patients the resources that they need if they're in an abusive relationship. I won't talk about domestic violence all night, even though I could. Like I said, we have 2 other practices, and there's a lot of overlap between our practices. So for the immigration practice, for instance, we partner a lot on cases involving VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, or U visas or T visas. I'll kind of get into what those are in a moment, but essentially, we have immigration clients who are also our domestic violence clients. So we work together and partner on cases like that. And the same goes for housing as well. We may have a client who says, I would really like to leave my abuser, but I'm locked into my lease for another 6 months. So we work with housing to help a client assert the Safe Homes Act, which allows them to break their lease, and potentially get their locks changed if they would prefer that avenue as well. Okay, like I said, I could talk about domestic violence forever, but I will move on. So our next practice area is housing. Oh my goodness. Okay, housing. So we represent renters, not homeowners. However, these are all of the services that we provide. We can represent for things like evictions, disputes between a landlord and tenant, which, as you can imagine, happen pretty frequently. Conditions and repairs. If something is a health hazard or a safety hazard and the landlord just isn't fixing it, housing can go in and work with cases like that. Breaking a lease, if the homeowner or the building owner has violated some condition of that lease, we're able to advocate on that behalf. Similar to what I was saying before with the Safe Homes Act, if someone is a survivor of domestic abuse and they want to break their lease, we can work with that. Rental assistance applications, illegal lockouts. So it will often happen where a landlord isn't happy with their tenant, and while their tenant is at work or out of town for a couple of days, they will change the locks on the apartment illegally. So we step in for situations like that. Sometimes landlords will illegally hold a security deposit, so we work with cases like that as well. Termination from subsidy being a government program like the Housing Choice Voucher. People are more familiar with that as Section 8. But if someone has been terminated from that, we can advocate in that as well. Reasonable accommodations. So if someone is handicapped, they are entitled to reasonable accommodations, whether that is a ramp to get into the building or handicap accessible doors, things like that. They are entitled to those accommodations. Oftentimes landlords will not abide by those reasonable accommodations, so we're able to advocate for that as well. And social service support. I was the only social worker for quite a while in North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, but now I'm happy to say that there is a community navigator and resource coordinator for the housing practice, whose name is Kadir, and he's wonderful. And he is now able to connect the housing clients to different services and resources in the community. Speaking of the community, the housing practice does so much work in the community, particularly through Know Your Rights presentations. Unlike domestic violence, where we have to be a little bit more secretive about our outreach, housing can have Know Your Rights presentations, which they do frequently. There's a big overlap between housing and immigration, and I'll get a little bit more into that in the next slide, but essentially, if someone is undocumented, they might be reluctant, or they might not even realize that their landlord could be in the wrong about something. So say if there is a health or a safety hazard present in the home, if someone is undocumented, they might not necessarily want to make waves, but we're able to advocate on their behalf. The housing practice also does housing clinics throughout the area, where people will just come in with whichever issue they have, and housing will do as many intakes and take as many cases as they possibly can. Like I was saying, there's also significant overlap with our practice through the Safe Homes Act, and overlap with immigration as well. And I think that about wraps it up on housing, which leads me to immigration. So immigration, as you can see, has an insane amount of services that they provide. I don't even think that this is an exhaustive list, but it's the bulk of what they do. So Firstly, the family-based immigrant visa petitions for spouses, children's, parents, and siblings. A lot of time, if someone is here, they might have a child or a spouse or a family member in their home country that they would like to move here. So we work with cases like those to help the family reunite. Consular processing, which I mean, as you can imagine, can be a complete nightmare. So the immigration practice will help people walk through that process. Citizenship obviously is a huge part of our immigration practice. Green card renewals, U visas and T visas. So I'm bringing it back to domestic violence. This is something that I mentioned previously. U visas are for victims of violent crime. T visas are for trafficking victims. There's a limited number of visas that can be given each year. However, the immigration practice, if someone is a victim of violent crime and is interested in pursuing this visa so that they can stay in the country, as long as they are cooperating with the authorities for the criminal case that they're involved in, they can apply for a U visa. And same for T visas as well. It's a few bullet points down, but this also goes along with VAWA, or the Violence Against Women Act. So say someone is undocumented and they're living with their abuser. They would like to leave, but they're worried about how they're going to survive or their immigration status. Maybe their immigration status is tied to their abuser. They can petition for VAWA, which allows them to leave their abuser, but it still provides that path to permanent status. And then backtracking a bit, obviously we work with asylum cases, DACA renewals, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, removal and deportation defense. They do a lot of work with that. Special immigrant juvenile status cases. Oh gosh, I feel like I'm missing something else, but that's the bulk of what they do. The wonderful thing about us is that we are a 501c3, which basically means that, well, it means a lot of things for tax purposes, but for us, it means that we're allowed to work with people who are undocumented, which really sets us apart from other legal aid clinics, even though we partner and refer to those other legal aid clinics frequently, and they refer to us depending on the types of cases we have at the time. That is something wonderful about us, that we're allowed to work with people who are undocumented and bring all these services to them. So the immigration practice also does an insane amount of community work, and they have their own Know Your Rights presentations as well, which they conduct in different languages. They have recently done work with people who have been, I guess, brought here from other states. They've worked in Palatine at hotels. I think they're also going to a hotel in another area this week to work with people who have been forced into Illinois, providing them a path to permanent residency. They do their own clinics as well, where they will have time at different organizations or in different towns so that people can just kind of come in, talk about what's happening with their immigration case and get services started through our clinic. And again, there's lots of overlap with the other practices, as I've talked about before. And the reason for that is that we really like to take a holistic approach. It's very rare that someone has just one thing happening. More often than not, they need other services. So we do try to take that holistic approach, and that's why we now also have a resource coordinator for the immigration team as well. So not only do I have one person working in social services with me, now I have two. We have one for each practice, and the one for the immigration practice is Rebecca. She's also absolutely wonderful. Kadir and Rebecca both speak Spanish and English. I have some Spanish, but it's terrible. So I'm really happy to help them and for them to help me in this work. It's absolutely wonderful. And that leads me to eligibility requirements and who we can help. So the immigration and housing practices do have an income requirement. They require that clients be below 250% of the federal poverty level. So if you're not familiar with that, basically the government sets different income standards each year for what they classify as being in poverty. And below 250% of the federal poverty level works out to about $70,000 gross for a family of 4 each year. So if you're able to look up charts online, they have them everywhere. They're very easy to Google, but just to give you a ballpark of what that means, $70,000 for a family of 4. The case has to be within Lake County or North Suburban Cook County. Like I said earlier, we work out of Waukegan, Skokie, or Rolling Meadows, occasionally at 555 West Harrison for the domestic violence team. But as long as people fall within that area, within that income, we're able to help. The domestic violence practice is a little bit unique. We have no income requirements whatsoever. The reason for that is that in a relationship, one partner may have access to all the resources and money in the world, but they've kept those resources from their partner. So we recognize that, and the only thing that we require to offer services is that someone be a victim of domestic violence. And remember that that definition includes emotional abuse, financial, verbal, what have you. As I mentioned before, we can represent clients who are undocumented, and our housing practice only represents tenants. We do not represent homeowners. So as long as someone is renting or living in subsidized housing, that is a case that we could work with. So what does this look like? The intake process. So we have an intake team. Typically what happens is someone will call our main line and request an appointment. They can also request an appointment by emailing us or clicking on the link on our website, which I'll give you at the end of the presentation. And then the intake team will do a pre-screen where they'll ask some basic questions. They'll make sure that the person qualifies for our services. So for housing and immigration, they would ask those income questions to make sure that the family is eligible. But if they're a survivor of domestic violence, they would just make the appointment for them. So they put a meeting on our calendars, and then the client has the opportunity to meet with staff to discuss whatever is happening. So regardless of whether or not we can take a case due to the nature of the case, capacity, sometimes we have conflicts, I guess you could say, if we've worked with the adverse party before, something like that. Regardless, they will still have that time to talk to us for that hour and chart a path forward. And if for some reason we weren't able to take the case, we do not leave people high and dry. We make sure that they have a referral, someone else that they can, potentially work with. And those clients would still be referred to me or to Rebecca or to Kadir if needed, to make sure that they still have options and they're still safe and able to feed their kids. We also have a dedicated staff member for the domestic violence team for intakes. Her name is Liz Chavez. She is our senior practice assistant. So I'll have to include her information in the chat as well, because I don't think it's part of the presentation, but she just has an added layer of training. So if someone is a domestic violence survivor, she's extremely well equipped, to work with people, and to make sure that they're safe and okay until they get that initial intake appointment. We take meetings over phone. We do them over Zoom. Even though our hours are 9 to 5, we frequently take intakes after hours, especially for the domestic violence practice. Sometimes someone's partner might only be out of the home at nighttime. So the domestic violence team is taking intake calls in the middle of the night because that's the only time that someone is safe. So wherever you are, we will work with you. We will meet you. I would say we're operating on a hybrid model at the moment. So we don't, and because we have such a big service territory, we don't necessarily have to meet with someone in our office. However, if that's something that you prefer, we can definitely do that as well. As I mentioned, our team, the overwhelming majority of them are bilingual in English and Spanish, but we have Korean and Polish speakers as well, along with that interpretation service that we use. So we're able to communicate with anyone. And yes, actually, I'm going to reiterate myself. We can do in-person meetings, but everything is on a case-by-case basis, whatever is best for the client and whatever works for the attorneys as well. So I'm definitely going to leave some time for questions, but this is what our QR code looks like. If anyone wants to connect to our website, here is our address in Highland Park. If someone did want to make an intake, schedule an intake, or had any questions, they can always email info@nslegalaid.org or call this number, which is our main line. As I said, we're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but if you need to arrange something, that can be handled. And that is about it from me. Does anyone have any questions? Anything that we can answer today? I know that I've thrown a lot of information out there.
Please go ahead and add any of your questions in the chat or the Q&A box.
And that's why I brought Ilana here as well, because as I have to say about 100 times a day, sadly, I am not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice, but I can find you someone who can answer your questions.
Yes, happy to help.
Ilana, could you maybe tell us about your experience as an attorney for the group?
Sure. So we are, I mean, right now, very busy. I think this is as unique of a job I think you can have, because we get to do not only legal work, but advocacy for our clients. And we really treat our clients really as a whole person. So we really try to address all of their needs. And that's why we have Michelle on our staff, and connect with all of the other practices, because it's not only, in the courtroom where we can help our survivors and help our clients that come into the clinic. So we do, we take in our intakes, we're in court constantly. Most court appearances right now are still over Zoom, which I think has been very helpful for our clients. It, works better with everybody's schedules, and also for a lot of our clients, it's, intimidating to be part of that process. So it is nice to be able to appear virtually, and we can reach a lot more people and help a lot more people in the legal arena while we have this kind of hybrid model in court. But on a day-to-day basis, we see all different types of cases. Speaking from the domestic violence practice, anything from orders of protection, and then we can help our clients see through their family cases. So sometimes, a lot of times we have clients that come in who have orders of protection, and then children who are also included on the orders of protection. And we will need to walk them through the family case and make sure that the children's best interests are being kept in mind. So once we move into a family case, oftentimes we will get a guardian ad litem assigned to the case, and that is a neutral individual, almost always an attorney in Lake County, where they can do investigations and interview clients with their children and talk to other people who know the children, school social workers, pediatricians, and get a sense of where the child is safest and what's in their best interest in terms of parenting time. And so it is quite a process, but it's important to kind of take the family as a whole unit and make sure that, you know, we're doing the best by the children involved. So each party can move forward safely, and, you know, keep the children's best interests at the forefront. So that's something that's been really important to us lately, and working more on child advocacy and, you know, making sure that kind of everybody's accounted for, because children of domestic violence households are also survivors. And so we're really trying to shift our focus and make sure that they're being taken care of as well.
100%. And to add to that, something that's really wonderful is I think that we approach things using a strengths-based model, because just, and again, we're talking about domestic violence, but you know, people are not just domestic violence survivors. And a lot of times when I have cases come across my desk, I try to think of what positive things the person has in their life already, because those are the most powerful things to utilize. So if someone has a child in school, you know, if we're able to, and if the family feels really comfortable with it, pulling in the school, because they have, well, one, they have the money to do things that I can't, but it's so much more powerful, and the impact is so much greater when you approach things from a strengths-based perspective, using someone's talent or skill, you know, or their wishes to really chart out a path forward for them. Because I could tell someone what to do all day, I could tell them what I would do, but that's not necessarily the best thing for them. It's not necessarily what they want. And that's something that I really love about my work, is that I think everyone across every single practice approaches their cases that way. You know, we have, especially for the immigration practice, clients that they know for years. And we're really sometimes the first introduction that people might have to this country, or for the domestic violence practice anyway, the first person that has ever told them, you can do this, like you deserve better. And that's a really big responsibility. But it's a wonderful thing. It's a great part of our work, and I think it's something that we're really proud of.
I would agree.
You had mentioned that domestic violence, people with domestic violence needs, they don't have to meet a certain financial threshold. What if that person is also needing help with immigration or housing? What happens in those cases?
Sure. So we would set up an intake with each practice. I think it kind of weeds out that step of having to go to the intake coordinator first. If we had a case where they said, oh, I'd also really like to speak with immigration, or I'd like to speak with housing, we would email that team directly to say, hey, when do you have time coming up? And then they're able to reach out to the client independently. But we like to give the warm handoff to that team, so that they don't have to start back from square one answering all of these intake questions all over again. So they're able to access the same database that we have for our case notes. You know, we can talk to them, make them aware of what's been happening up until this point, and introduce them to the team. And for me, especially because there's so much overlap with housing and immigration, that makes things so much easier. And it's part of the reason why I'm so excited to have Rebecca and Kadir on board, because we can really tackle things as a team, especially for the Spanish speaking clients as well, that we can take those cases in tandem and really bring all of our brain power together.
And also the nice thing with working with, well, you know, all of the different practices at once, is that even if they don't qualify for, let's say they don't qualify under immigration's income requirements,
Mhm.
if we were helping them as a domestic violence client and they qualified, but we know they have immigration issues, I will often consult with the attorneys just to ask, basic questions. So I know as I'm moving a client through a divorce proceeding, I want to make sure that it's not going to affect their immigration status. And I can still get those answers without them, directly working with the client. And then we can provide them with referrals to an immigration attorney who could help them. And it might be a private attorney that they can pay for if they don't meet the income requirements, or other organizations that don't, have the same requirements. So, there's still ways to help in the immigration, sphere, even if they don't qualify for one practice and they qualify for the other.
100%. I bother them quite a lot, especially with clients who have issues with state benefits. I think that so much has changed with state benefits, especially in recent years, that clients are really afraid to pursue something that would really help them, because they're worried that it would negatively impact them down the road. So I email Leah, who is our immigration director, a couple of times a week, I would say. I try not to bother her too much, just to say, hey, I really want to refer this person for this thing, but I just want to check, does this fall under public charge, or are they going to be okay? And she'll tell me one way or the other. Because again, as I have to say 100 times a day, I'm not an attorney. I can't legally advise you one way or the other. So it's really wonderful to have that collective brain power. Again, even if someone isn't an immigration client, being able to consult without having to jump through so many hoops is absolutely wonderful. And I think something that sets us apart, honestly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this information about the ways that North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic can help. Doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, but thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I hope that you learned something that you find helpful. So have a good night.
Thank you so much. And if anyone does have any questions after tonight, please feel free to email us, call us at any of the links or phone numbers listed there.
Well, thank you again for presenting tonight.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Take care.
Thanks for having us.